December 15th, 1944. 5th Panzer Army Headquarters, Kilburg, Western Germany. Generaloberst Hasso von Manteuffel studied the latest intelligence briefings with his division commanders gathered around the situation map. Among them stood Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the once-elite Panzer Lehr Division, his weathered face showing the strain of 6 months of continuous retreat since Normandy. The upcoming Ardennes Offensive, what would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge, represented Germany's last desperate gamble in the West. Mein Herr, Major Werner Hoffmann, Bayerlein's intelligence officer, pointed to the markings on the map. The Americans have concentrated significant armor here, near Aachen. Our reconnaissance counts at least 300 Sherman tanks in this sector alone. 300 tanks in one sector. Von Manteuffel absorbed this information with the calm of a professional soldier who had long ago learned to face unpleasant realities. The contempt that German leadership had once shown for American industrial capacity had proven to be one of the war's most catastrophic miscalculations. "And our Tiger strength for the entire offensive?" von Manteuffel asked, though he already knew the depressing answer. "Perhaps 50 operational Tiger IIs along the entire front, Herr Generaloberst," came the reply. "Most of the 506th Heavy Tank Battalion's Tigers are still under repair." Germany had built 1,347 Tiger I tanks between August 1942 and August 1944, when production ceased. Only 492 Tiger IIs were produced from January 1944 to March 1945. These numbers, which had once seemed adequate when each Tiger could destroy multiple enemy tanks, now appeared pitiful against the American flood. Bayerlein remembered his shock upon first learning the true scale of American production. The United States built 49,324 Sherman tanks between 1942 and 1945, with more than 50,000 produced overall. When he had first heard such figures from interrogated American officers in Normandy, he had dismissed them as propaganda. No nation, he reasoned, could produce armor on such a scale while simultaneously fighting in the Pacific. Yet the evidence had mounted before his eyes daily throughout the retreat across France. Every American division seemed fully equipped with tanks, tank destroyers, half-tracks, and support vehicles. Every loss was replaced within days. The roads behind American lines groaned under the weight of endless armored columns. "Remember when we first learned of their production targets?" von Manteuffel asked the assembled officers. "In 1940, when the Americans announced they would build 50,000 aircraft annually," Göring laughed. He said they knew nothing of war production, that Americans only knew how to make razor blades. The room fell silent. They all knew how that contempt had played out. When Rommel had complained about American equipment in North Africa, Göring had allegedly dismissed it with contempt, only to have Rommel reportedly reply, "We could do with some of those razor blades, Herr Reichsmarschall." Now those American razor blades had carved through France and stood poised at Germany's border. "Herr Generaloberst," a young staff officer ventured, "surely our Tiger's quality advantage still counts for something?" A single Tiger II could hold up a dozen Sherman tanks, and often did. Von Manteuffel turned to Bayerlein. "Fritz, you've faced them since Normandy. Tell us about American armor tactics." Bayerlein moved to the map. The young officer is correct about individual engagements. In a straight fight, one Tiger is worth several Shermans. But the Americans don't fight straight fights. They practice what they call pile-on tactics. They simply overwhelm with numbers. He traced his finger across the map, marking battles from the past 6 months. "At Mortain, my division destroyed 47 American tanks in one day. By the next morning, they had been replaced. At the Falaise Gap, we knocked out Sherman after Sherman, only to face fresh companies the following day." "But surely," another officer protested, "their losses must be affecting morale." A Sherman crew cannot feel confident facing our Tigers. Bayerlein laughed bitterly. I interrogated an American tanker at Aachen. His Sherman had been knocked out 3 times. 3 times! Each time he was given a new tank within 48 hours. He joked that he was running out of personal belongings to lose. When I asked if the losses concerned him, he said, "General, Detroit builds them faster than you can destroy them." The Detroit Arsenal tank plant built a quarter of the 89,568 tanks produced in the US overall during World War II, producing 22,234 tanks, one factory, producing more tanks than several nations combined. The room digested this sobering information. Outside, they could hear the rumble of their precious Panthers and Tigers being prepared for the offensive, each one representing months of skilled labor and increasingly scarce resources. The Americans approach war differently, Bayerlein continued. They see it as an industrial problem to be solved through mass production. While we built tanks like Swiss watches, they built them like automobiles. He shared his experience visiting a captured American maintenance depot near Metz. They had spare parts for everything: engines, transmissions, even entire turrets. They repaired tanks the way a garage fixes cars. We husband each Tiger like a precious jewel. They treat Shermans like replaceable tools. Major Hoffman added more disturbing intelligence. The Americans have also mastered what they call battlefield recovery. They have specialized recovery vehicles that salvage both their knocked-out tanks and ours. These factors combine to give the Allies numerical superiority in most battles. Von Manteuffel stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the winter landscape. Gentlemen, we face not the American army but American industry. Every tank we destroy, they replace with 2. Every Tiger we lose is irreplaceable. The statistics were damning. German tank production was hampered by Allied bombing and resource shortages. Meanwhile, American factories operated 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. "What about tank crews?" asked the Tiger Battalion commander. "Surely they cannot train them as fast as they build tanks." Bayerlein shook his head. "The Americans have established massive training facilities in the United States and England. They produce crews on the same mass production principles as tanks. Are they as skilled as our veteran panzer crews? Number. Do they need to be when they outnumber us 10-1? Also no." Kurt Knispel, credited with 168 confirmed tank kills, the highest scoring tank ace of World War II, had once visited Panzer Lehr before his death in April. The legendary tank ace had been sobered by what he saw in the West. In Russia, Knispel had told Bayerlein, tank battles are still decided by skill and courage. Here, they are decided by numbers. You face an enemy who has turned war into mass production. The discussion turned to the upcoming offensive. They would attack with approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, the majority being Panthers and Panzer Fours, with precious few Tigers. Intelligence estimated the Americans had over 4,000 tanks in France and Belgium, with more arriving weekly. "The Führer believes a decisive victory will split the Allies," von Manteuffel said carefully. They all knew better than to voice doubts about Hitler's strategy, but the arithmetic was inescapable. Bayerlein thought of the reports from tank crews who had fought at Villers-Bocage, where SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann had single-handedly destroyed numerous British vehicles in minutes. Such individual heroics had become legendary, but they were ultimately meaningless against industrial might. "Gentlemen," von Manteuffel concluded the briefing, "we will attack as ordered. Perhaps we can achieve tactical surprise. Perhaps bad weather will ground their aircraft. Perhaps many things. But know this, we fight not just their army, but their factories." As the officers dispersed, Bayerlein remained, studying the map. His adjutant, Captain Friedrich Weber, joined him. "Herr General, do you think the offensive can succeed?" Bayerlein was quiet for a long moment. "Friedrich, Have you ever seen the American industrial newsreels we captured? Hundreds of tanks rolling off assembly lines, workers, including women, building tanks around the clock. In December 1942, the arsenal's 5,000 workers set an all-time monthly record by producing 896 Sherman tanks. Surely those are propaganda, Herr General? That's what I thought. Until I counted the serial numbers on captured Shermans. They're real, Friedrich. All real. The next morning, Bayerlein visited his tank crews preparing for the offensive. These were good men, veterans who had survived France and the retreat across Belgium. Their Panthers were excellent tanks, superior to the Sherman in gun and armour. But as he walked among them, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were craftsmen preparing to fight an assembly line. At the maintenance area, he found Feldwebel Hans Müller working on his Panther's transmission, again. The Panther, for all its qualities, was mechanically complex and prone to breakdowns. How long for repairs, Müller? 2 days, Herr General, if we can find the parts. The transmission is shot. We need a complete replacement. 2 days. Bayerlein thought of the captured American maintenance manual he'd studied. Sherman engines could be changed in approximately 4 hours. The modular design and standardized parts made maintenance far simpler than on German tanks. Walking through the assembly area, he noticed how many tanks were marked with kill rings, white bands painted on the gun barrels marking destroyed enemy tanks. Some Panthers displayed 10, 15, even 20 rings. Yet what did individual kill ratios matter when the enemy could afford to lose 10 tanks for every one they destroyed? The human cost weighed heavily. Each destroyed German tank meant veteran crews lost, men who took years to train properly. Tank aces like Kurt Knispel were irreplaceable. The Americans, by contrast, seemed to have an endless supply of eager young crews, trained in mass at facilities like Fort Knox. That evening, intelligence brought more disturbing news. American tank production was actually accelerating. New models were appearing. The M4A3E8 Easy 8 with improved suspension and the 76mm gun, the M26 Pershing heavy tank to match the Tiger. Even if Germany could maintain current production levels, which was doubtful under Allied bombing, the gap would only widen. Captain Weber brought Bayerlein a captured American field manual. Reading it was revealing. The Americans had systematized every aspect of tank warfare, from production to recovery to crew replacement. They fought statistical warfare, calculating acceptable loss ratios, replacement rates, and maintenance schedules with mathematical precision. Look at this, Weber. Bayerlein showed him a section on crew survival. They assume 60% crew survival from knocked-out tanks. They plan for it, design for it. The Sherman's spring-loaded hatches, the ammunition storage, even the escape procedures, all designed to save crews for the next tank. This was the heart of the American advantage. They didn't need tank aces when they could field thousands of competent crews. They didn't need mechanical perfection when they could repair or replace quickly. They had turned tank warfare into an industrial process. December 16th arrived, the opening of the Ardennes Offensive. Bayerlein's Panzer Lehr, rebuilt to about 60% strength, rolled forward in the pre-dawn darkness. Initially, tactical surprise was complete. American forward positions crumbled, and for a few days it seemed the offensive might succeed. But then American reinforcements began arriving in overwhelming force. The 2nd and 3rd Armoured Divisions, the 4th, 6th and 10th Armoured Divisions, each fully equipped, each with hundreds of tanks. The arithmetic of attrition resumed its grim work. Near Bastogne, Bayerlein watched a Panther crew destroy 6 Shermans in a single engagement. The veteran crew worked with practiced efficiency. Yet even as the 6th Sherman burned, additional tanks appeared on the horizon. Herr General, the Panther commander reported, we're down to 12 armor-piercing rounds. Ammunition shortage, another facet of the production war. While American tanks arrived with full ammunition loads and ample resupply, German crews increasingly had to husband every shell. The weather cleared after Christmas, bringing American fighter bombers. But even more devastating was the news that American armored spearheads were approaching from the north and south. Patton's Third Army had turned 90 degrees and was racing toward Bastogne with an entire armored corps. By early January 1945, the offensive had clearly failed. Panzer Lehr had lost 80% of its tanks and assault guns. The Americans, having absorbed the initial blow, were counter-attacking with fresh divisions. At a commanders' conference on January 10th, the reality was laid bare. German tank strength in the West had fallen below 300 operational vehicles. American strength exceeded 5,000 tanks, with more arriving daily. On January 15th, Bayerlein received a visit from Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, now Chief of the General Staff. The architect of Blitzkrieg looked haggard, worn down by arguing with Hitler about reality. "Fritz," Guderian said privately, "I've just come from the Führer's headquarters." He still talks of wonder weapons, of quality overcoming quantity. He doesn't understand that the Americans have made quality irrelevant through quantity. "We have severely underestimated the Russians, the extent of the country and the treachery of the climate. This is the revenge of reality." Guderian had written those words about the Eastern Front, but they applied equally to American industrial capacity. "What did we miss, Herr Generaloberst?" Bayerlein asked. Guderian was quiet for a moment. "We revolutionized warfare in 1940 by concentrating tanks. The Americans revolutionized it again by mass-producing them. We thought like soldiers. They thought like industrialists." As January turned to February, the American steamroller continued. They crossed the Roer River with hundreds of tanks. They breached the Siegfried Line with specialized Sherman variants, flamethrower tanks, bulldozer tanks, bridge-laying tanks. For every tactical problem, they had an industrial solution. The human dimension of this production war was equally telling. American women, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, had entered war production in massive numbers. Between 1940 and 1945, the female percentage of the US workforce increased from 27% to nearly 37%. Bayerlein had seen captured photographs of American tank factories. Women operating welding torches, driving rivets, assembling engines. At the Willow Run bomber plant alone, women made up 36.5% of the assembly workers. While Germany scraped the barrel for slave labor that actively sabotaged production, America mobilized its entire population voluntarily. Rose Will Monroe, a riveter at the Willow Run aircraft factory in Michigan, building B-24 bombers, became one of many real-life Rosies. These women weren't just symbols. They were producing the weapons that were crushing the Wehrmacht. The contrast was stark. German Tiger production required skilled workers and took twice as long as other tanks. American production used simplified designs that could be assembled by workers with minimal training. Quality versus quantity, craftsmanship versus mass production. By March 1945, Panzer Lehr existed more on paper than in reality. Bayerlein commanded perhaps 20 operational tanks and a few hundred exhausted men. Intelligence reported American armored spearheads racing deep into Germany, their advances limited more by fuel logistics than German resistance. On March 15th, visiting a forward position, Bayerlein encountered a young Panther commander, Lieutenant Wilhelm Fischer. The boy proudly showed off his tank's 16 kill rings. "Excellent shooting, Lieutenant," Bayerlein complimented. "Thank you, Herr General. With luck, I'll reach 20 before—" He didn't finish, but they both knew. Before his Panther broke down irreparably, before they ran out of fuel, before American numbers overwhelmed them. Watching the young officer return to his tank, Bayerlein thought of all the kill rings on all the German tanks. Thousands of American tanks destroyed. Yet they kept coming, an endless river of steel flowing from American factories. That evening, Bayerlein received his final intelligence report. American tank strength in Europe exceeded 8,000 operational vehicles. German tank strength, under 200 vehicles on all fronts. He thought back to 1940, when German military leaders had dismissed American industrial potential, when they had laughed at the idea of automobile manufacturers building tanks. The Detroit Arsenal had been designed by Albert Kahn and built by Chrysler in just 8 months, with the first tank delivered on April 24, 1941, while the plant was still under construction. From nothing to the world's greatest tank factory in 8 months. That should have been the warning. But warnings had been ignored, dismissed by ideology and arrogance. Now German crews fought their final battles in their magnificent but irreplaceable machines, while American crews climbed into their infinitely replaceable Shermans. The numerical reality had never been starker. Germany built 1,347 Tiger I tanks. America built 49,324 Sherman tanks. Each Tiger might destroy 10 Shermans, but America could afford the exchange. Germany could not. In April 1945, as commander of the 53rd Army Corps, Bayerlein made the difficult decision to surrender. On April 15, 1945, without informing Field Marshal Model, Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein surrendered his entire force to the U.S. Army in the Ruhr Pocket. Model would commit suicide 6 days later rather than face capture, but Bayerlein had chosen to save his men from pointless death. During his captivity from April 1945 to April 1947, Bayerlein cooperated fully with U.S. Army historians, writing 20 manuscripts about his experiences. This cooperation garnered hostile threats from many fellow officers who saw it as betrayal. But Bayerlein saw it differently. The truth needed to be told. In his manuscripts, he wrote candidly about the production war's lessons. German military excellence had been real, the Wehrmacht's tactical innovations, the superb training, the advanced technology. But none of it mattered against an enemy who could produce faster than you could destroy. As he was driven into captivity, Bayerlein passed endless columns of American armor moving east. One Sherman had Detroit Special painted on its turret. The crew, seeing his rank, offered him a cigarette. "I'm from Detroit," the sergeant said. "Built these things before I drove 'em." The casual statement summarized everything. American workers who built cars had built tanks with the same matter-of-fact efficiency. They had won not through military genius, but through industrial organization. Years later, writing his memoirs, Bayerlein would conclude, "The Tiger was the superior tank. The Sherman was the superior weapon system. We understood war. The Americans understood production. In the 20th century, production was war." The numbers told the final story. Germany had built fewer than 1,850 Tigers of both models. America had built over 49,000 Shermans, plus thousands of other armored vehicles. The Tigers had won the battles. The Shermans had won the war. The military production was astounding. 300,000 aircraft, 12,000 ships, 86,000 tanks, and 64,000 landing craft. This was the true measure of American industrial might, not just tanks, but everything needed for global war. As one American officer told Bayerlein after the surrender, "General, you Germans built tanks. We Americans manufactured victory." The production war's lessons resonated far beyond 1945. Future conflicts would be decided not by tactical brilliance or technological superiority alone, but by industrial capacity and logistical excellence. The nation that could produce the most, transport the most, and replace losses the fastest would prevail. Germany had built 1,347 Tigers, engineering marvels that represented the pinnacle of tank design. America had overwhelmed them with 49,234 Shermans, industrial products that represented the triumph of mass production. In the end, the factories of America had proven mightier than the workshops of the Reich. The production line had defeated the battlefield. The assembly worker had triumphed over the artisan. It was a new kind of war, and America had written the rules.